Number 9. Subshelter. Located in the Primorsky region of Russia, this odd shelter is set up for some sort of post-apocalyptic movie. It was meant to shelter submarines of the Pacific Fleet in case of a nuclear war, its build getting started in the 1960s. It became one of the many unfinished objects that were abandoned after the collapse of the USSR. By the 80s, it became very clear this intended nuclear fleet shelter was unneeded because the USSR and the USA had to reduce their nuclear arsenal over the next 7 years due to the agreement they wanted to be signed in May 1991. The agreement was to highlight the reduction of strategic nuclear forces. Even though it was never finished, the subshelter held neat features such as 2 interconnected tunnels, one of them being a water channel 450 meters long and 19 meters wide. The other one was twice as short. They were able to hold 3 guided missile cruises. It hasn't been active for over 25 years, but it wouldn't take much to finish it off. Let's hope not. Number 8. Rochester Psychiatric Hospital. Built in the 1950s, Terrence Tower and the Psychiatric Hospital and Morgue located in Rochester, New York, first opened its doors in 1959. With the tower being 16 stories, it was able to hold over 1,000 beds, housing patients having small mental disabilities to those whose conditions were more extreme. The floors varied, with the 5th floor dedicated to the criminally insane and a general hospital being split between the 13th and 14th floors. A morgue and a lab could be found in the basement. Terrence Tower didn't like to discriminate, though. They treated all of their patients poorly. According to the nurses and floor staff that worked there, patients had to endure abuse from the 1960s well into the late 1980s. They were treated like objects, seen as unfit or crazy, even if they had issues that were considered small. They underwent lobotomies and electric shock therapy and were heavily dosed with medications when staff didn't want them to be disruptive. If that isn't disturbing enough, some patients were dropped off as babies and remained there for the rest of their lives or well into adulthood. As time went on, inhumane treatments were no longer acceptable and began somewhat of a taboo subject. Hospitals began to care more about their patients' mental health, and they were a resource of help and acceptance rather than being a dumping ground. Thankfully, because these practices were seen as no longer acceptable, asylums including Terrence Tower started closing their doors all over the country. Terrence Tower closed its doors for good in 1995. It now sits vacant and empty as it has been for the last 23 years. In 2019, there were talks in the works about demolishing the building and using the property for apartment buildings. Number 7. Lost cities of the Amazon. For centuries, there's been speculation that lost cities exist deep within the Amazon's wilderness. Beginning over 600 years ago, Spanish explorers set out to seek the infamous El Dorado, allegedly the city of gold. Most of them went off the map and were never seen by civilization again. Recently, in the 20th century, a British explorer by the name of Percy Fawcett set out to explore the lost city of Z. Like many of the others, Percy too vanished and was added to the list of people who sought out but couldn't quite get there. The search never ended because more recently, scientists have discovered that ancient cities did exist in the Amazon forests. They did this using key technology, which is a light-based remote sensing technology otherwise known as LiDAR. It was used to digitally deforest the canopy so they could identify the ancient ruins near Llanos de Mojos in the Bolivian Amazon. The images captured revealed quite clearly the socially complex Casanre culture, which dates back to 500 to 1400 CE. This recent discovery proves that Amazon's rainforests were quite populated, even before the recorded history of the area ever began. Other archaeological work shows hundreds of isolated sites across more than 1,700 square miles of the Llano de Mojos area, which included settlements lived in year-round by the Casabre, who grew crops, fished, and hunted. Over 600 miles of canals and causeways have also been revealed. It's a marvelous piece of work. It shows a remarkable range of things that humans did in the past to work with their landscapes and work with larger and larger populations. This, according to Michael Heckenberger, an anthropologist who studies at the University of Florida. Number 6. Glacier Boot. After being swept away in an avalanche on the slopes of Naga Parbat in Pakistan, young Italian climber Günter Messner suffered his untimely death in 1970, nearly 50 years ago. His death was considered anything but mysterious to locals, with suggestions that Günter's very own brother, Reinhold Messner, had abandoned him in hopes of climbing and reaching the top of the 26,660-foot mountain all by himself. Naturally, Reinhold suggests that the allegations were nonsense and that he barely survived the whole ordeal himself, as he had to walk the terrain rain for 6 long days before getting help. This isn't the first time Reinhold has escaped death by a hairline. He's now a world-renowned mountaineer, and he's the first person to complete the hike up Mount Everest without oxygen. Reinhold's innocence has recently been proven this spring after Gunter's custom-made climbing boot was found in a glacier, right where Reinhold said he was swept away, at the foot of the mountain's western diameter face. Aside from this discovery, a bone belonging to Gunter was found on the mountain in 2005, along with his other boot. The mountain never lies, and if there was still the need, the discovery of this boot definitively establishes the truth of my brother's death, Reinhold reported to an Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera. Reinhold has expressed his wishes for his brother's boot to be sent to him in Italy, where he'd like to put it on display in the Messner Mountain Museum, which was started in 2006 to educate its visitors on rock climbing and mountaineering. Number 5. City Methodist Church in Gary, Indiana. In 1906, a Methodist preacher named William Grant Seaman dreamed of bringing a prominent religious presence to Gary, Indiana due to the numbering brothels and drinking establishments. His dream was so big he needed a bigger church, and big dreams meant needing big money. He was given back by the chief employer in the city known as U.S. Steel. They donated the site on which it was to be built and half of the cost. In total, it took about 21 months to build the church, and it was started in 1925. It wasn't the typical average church. It was a 9-story complex with a theater named after Seaman, a gymnasium, corporate offices, and even a dining hall. By 1929, Seaman grew wildly unpopular due to his interests in cultural diversity. Due to this, his congregation forced him to step down and transfer to a church in Ohio. He eventually passed away in 1944, and his ashes were given to the church per his request. During the Great Depression, the church had to release Seaman Hall to Gary College because they really needed the funds. It peaked in the 1950s with its members reaching 3,000 people. Because the costs for the building were so large, the church took a turn for the worse in the 60s, lasting through the 70s. Unfortunately, the church was unable to afford the upkeep, and by 1973, membership had dwindled to a mere 300 people. By 1975, the church closed its doors once and for all. After its demise, it was handed over to Indiana University, yet nothing was done with it. It was neglected and ultimately fell into disrepair, and in 1997, a fire took over the church. In 2014, plans were made over and over again to restore the building, yet plans were scrapped time and time again. Fun fact, the church has made appearances in several films, TV shows, and documentaries. Number 4. A 2,100-year-old farmstead. Archaeologists have discovered what is believed to be a 2,100-year-old farmstead that may have been abandoned in haste by its owners in fear of a pending military invasion. Located in northern Israel along the Sea of Galilee, it appears to be frozen in time. Though the archaeologists who excavated the site don't know exactly who lived there, they believe the population was part of the Seleucid Empire, who escaped because of the impending invasion of the area by the Hasmonean kingdom. Among their findings were agricultural tools like scythes and picks made from iron, intact storage jars, weights for weaving looms, and coins that dated back to the second half of the 2nd century BC. Little to almost nothing is known about the people or daily life during the Hasmonean period, though the discovery of the loom weights lead the team to believe that weaving was an important task, suggesting that maybe the inhabitants kept herds of sheep or goats. The farmstead discovery was true luck, as it was found during an investigation during a proposed $270 million pipeline project that would deliver fresh water to farmland in Israel and other nearby countries. Number 3. The ghost town of Bodie, California, USA. After miners discovered rich deposits of gold and silver in the desert of what is now California in 1859, the mining town of Bodie was born. Hearing about this, people flooded the town in search of wealth and a great life. Eventually, Bodie became a town full of brothels and hip joints, a sin city. The start of the gold rush. The hot boom of Bodie left just as quickly as it came, and just like that, Bodie became a ghost town by the 1940s. In its prime, Bodie had multiple wealthy mine and stamp mill companies, the bread and butter of the town. But by 1868, those companies were completely abandoned because it seemed the town had been drained of all their gold. Bodie did run into luck once again when a mine collapsed in 1875, revealing a large body of gold. Word got out to neighboring towns, and once again, Bodie was back on the rise with new residents and miners. Bodie was booming as investors and wealthy companies were buying shares. Residents were sure this was it. Bodie was prosperous, successful, and wealthy again. Investors from big cities such as San Francisco and New York City continuously dug deeper mines, spending more money in the hopes of finding even more gold. Unfortunately for them, the big payday never came. The gold was gone. Over the next few years, settlers still came to Bodie looking for gold, and the population grew, forcing Bodie to become a violent Wild West boomtown. Once the population reached 800, the digging and mining eventually stopped, and the town of Bodie was officially broke. Eventually, residents skipped town, leaving behind whatever wasn't nailed down. Bodie today is a National Historic Site and is known to be in arrested decay. Number 2. Ponyhenge. Out in the middle of an open pasture in Lincoln, Massachusetts lies great mystery and weirdness in the form of a field filled with plastic rocking horses, ponies, and various other vintage toys. The first pony was noticed sometime in 2010, making its arrival on Old Sudbury Road about 15 miles west of Boston. The questions that the residents of Lincoln asked are how and why did this little horse get here? Speculation claims that a little boy ditched it after working at his lemonade stand, or that it was left over from a Christmas display. The owners loved the horse collection, reporting to the Boston Globe. There was something lovely about it being anonymous, and now every time we go away, another one appears. One plastic rocking horse appearing out of nowhere is strange all by itself, but what is even more strange is the fact that more horses and ponies started to appear. The creepy part is that every so often the horses are in different patterns. Sometimes they'll sit neatly in a row, other times in a circle, and they've even been seen laying scattered around as if they had a big night of dancing the night before. Does this mean they come alive when no one is looking? No one will ever know. Where do you think the ponies are coming from? Let us know in the comments. Number 1. Discovery Island. Amazement, wonder, fun, and magic come to mind when you think of Disney World, but what if you were told there was a hidden secret right before your very eyes? On Disney World's map, an empty green mass can be seen sitting in the middle of Bay Lake, located in Orlando, Florida. It was passed off as a mysterious island, but this was anything but that. It was actually another amusement park called Discovery Island, closing suddenly in 1999. Discovery Island first opened in 1976 under its original name Treasure Island. In the same year, it was renamed Discovery Island, with its main attractions being over 150 exotic birds and fauna. In 1989, Disney was accused by PETA for mistreating vultures that landed on the island. Disney did not admit to the allegations, but they did say that some vultures did die during their capture. Charles Cook, the park's curator, and 4 of his staff members had 16 serious charges filed against them, including mishandling of vultures, shooting hawks and falcons, and the damaging of ibis and egret nests. Investigators found a small metal shed that had no windows, food, water, or perches. Inside the shelter, 19 vultures were found. One of them was dead. Cook and his workers claimed the vultures defecated on the boardwalks and attacked animals, and the hawks, falcons, and owls attacked the show pigeons. After cleaning up their act, the charges were dropped. Disney would not admit they did anything wrong. Soon after, Disney debuted its park, Animal Kingdom. In April 1999, Discovery Island closed for good. To this day, trespassers make their way into the park, despite Disney's warning not to. Swimming across the lake using a GoPro and dropping drones in the park are all attempts, and some successful, made at seeing the park. Anyone who was caught received penalties, fines, and life bans from the park. It just goes to show you that curiosity always comes with a price. Number 9. World War I Munitions. Le Meurthomme, or Dead Man's Hill, is the site of a bloody World War I battle that was fought between the Germans and the French in late February 1916. It marked the beginning of the months-long Battle of Verdun, which lasted into December of that year. After this initial battle at Meurthomme, the Germans dumped copious amounts of unexploded munitions into the River Meuse. Many of them ended up buried in the riverbed as the water's path gradually changed over the years. In 2018, as the anniversary of the war's end approached, bomb disposal experts were still digging up munitions at the battle site and elsewhere throughout eastern France where fighting occurred. The recovery process is painstaking, requiring scuba divers to enter the icy river, tie ropes around dozens of shells, and then remove them with a crane. The Metz Demining Center told Reuters that it removes between 50 and 55 tons. That's about 30 times as heavy as a car of ordnance every year, and estimated that there was still another 275 to 330 tons, which is about 4 times as heavy as the space shuttle, waiting to be removed from the surrounding landscape. The good news is that these munitions are at little risk of exploding, and the remote Zone Rouge or Red Zone sees few visitors. Authorities don't want to take the chances of someone getting hurt, especially because some people have taken it upon themselves to dig up the bombs and have gotten seriously injured or killed. So they continue to work diligently to eventually make the area 100% explosive-free. Number 8. Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a toxic herbicide that contained the deadly chemical dioxin. In a program codenamed Operation Ranch Hand, it was used by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War to destroy crops and forest cover in Viet Cong territory. The chemical was also used in areas that were occupied by the North Vietnamese Army. Between 1961 and 1971, 4.5 million acres, that's just a little smaller than New Jersey, Across Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos were doused with over 20 million gallons of Agent Orange and other toxic chemicals. That would be about the same as filling up your gas tank about 1,000,000 times. Agent Orange was by far the most heavily used substance throughout the program, with at least 13 million gallons being used during Operation Ranch Hand. That's about the same as filling your bathtub up 4 million times. It caused serious health issues for those who were exposed to it, including civilians and U.S. service members. People suffered from rashes, severe psychological and neurological issues, birth defects, liver problems, and cancer. It's also linked to type 2 diabetes, nerve disorders, heart disease, and immune system dysfunction, to just name a few. For those who live in countries that were sprayed with Agent Orange, these health issues have continued into modern times. The chemical, which is dangerous even in small amounts, made its way onto roadways and established a lasting presence in soil and water. It causes major health issues for people who weren't even alive during the Vietnam War, and this is clear in the high level of birth defects among children born in the affected areas. Vietnam and the U.S. have gone back and forth for decades trying to reach a reasonable agreement regarding the American government's financial obligations toward health care and the massive cleanups for ridding the environment of the chemical. This cleanup is predicted to come at a price tag of around $300 million. The U.S. government finally started assisting in post-war cleanup efforts in 2012. Number 7. A Japanese bomb in an American backyard. While recently gardening in her backyard, Missouri resident Pamela Lovett noticed a rusty, mud-covered object in the ground. She took it inside and her husband, Sam Coffey, washed it off and began scraping away at it with a knife to find out what it was. Lovett noticed Japanese lettering on the item and shouted at Coffey to stop what he was doing because he might have a bomb in his hands. Using Google Lens, the couple determined it was probably a bomb. What started out as an ordinary afternoon turned chaotic when the pair called the local sheriff's office, who arrived along with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the Air Force, Coffey told NBC News. Authorities made Lovett and Coffey wait outside the home while they set up a perimeter and investigated. Experts determined the bomb was still live and had a 500-foot blast range. That's a distance almost as tall as the Washington Monument. Thankfully, the St. Louis Regional Bomb and Arson Unit removed the explosive without incident, while reminding Lovett and Coffey how lucky they were that they didn't get hurt or killed. The couple posted the shocking news on social media and it went viral. Meanwhile, the bomb was detonated in a controlled explosion at an Air Force base. Nobody knows how the foreign bomb ended up in someone's yard in America, and it's possible that we'll never know. Number 6. Leftover unexploded Vietnam-era ordnance. Between 1964 and 1973, U.S. forces secretly conducted hundreds of thousands of bombing missions over Laos, dropping the equivalent of a plane load of bombs on the country every 8 minutes on average. These campaigns were carried out to stop traffic along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a key North Vietnamese supply route, and to support the royal government in its efforts against the communist movement known as the Pathet Lao. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were displaced as their villages were destroyed. 1/3 of the bombs that were dropped over Laos did not explode, leaving people at constant risk of coming into contact with deadly unexploded ordnance. Since the bombing stopped, over 20,000 Lao citizens have died in instances like these. A lot of property owners, including many farmers, are aware that there are dangerous explosives buried on their land, but they can't afford the cleanup, so they're left with no choice but to take their chances and till the land for the sake of making a living. Cleanup efforts have been ongoing for many years now. The U.S. contributes roughly $4,900,000 per year to the cleanup, which is a lot less than the country spent raining bombs over Laos for 9 years straight. As of 2008, the number of annual casualties stood at around 310. Today, that number has been reduced to 50, but it's still a problem, especially since about 60% of accidents result in death and around 40% involve children. As of September 1, 2021, the 300,000th unexploded bomb was removed from the ground and safely disposed of. It marked a long overdue milestone in the efforts to make the country safe, but there's still a long way to go before the Lao people can live without fear of being injured or killed by one of the many bombs that remain on their land. Do you think the U.S. should pay for the entire cleanup, or should Vietnam's government pay for part of it? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to hit the subscribe button before the end of the video. Number 5. World War II bombs in Germany. Out of the 2.7 million tons of bombs that the U.S. and Britain dropped on Europe between 1940 and 1945, half fell on Germany. That's more weight than 1 million elephants. The country's landscape was crippled, closely resembling a moonscape more than anything else of this world. After the war, reconstruction began almost immediately. even though roughly 10% of the bombs dropped on Germany never exploded. Both East and West Germany were rebuilt atop tens of thousands of tons of unexploded ordnance. Police bomb disposal technicians on both sides were tasked with taking care of the hazardous materials. But they didn't get everything. As recently as 2016, at least 2,000 tons of undetonated bombs were being found in Germany every year. That's about 30 times as heavy as the space shuttle. The government takes plenty of precautions, including requiring a thorough inspection of a parcel of land before any sort of construction begins. Despite that, some bombs go undetected. In 2015, 20,000 people were evacuated from Dortmund after a bomb was discovered mid-construction. Just a few years earlier in 2011, 45,000 people were evacuated when a similar device was exposed during a drought. It was the largest evacuation in Germany since World War II. Since the year 2000, 11 bomb technicians have died, despite the country being at peace for over 3 generations. Speaking with Smithsonian Magazine, bomb technician Horst Reinhardt said that he is never expected to be doing his job for upwards of 30 years. He also mentioned that the city of Oranienburg is Germany's most dangerous city, experiencing almost daily bomb-related issues. It appears as though the leftover munitions from one of history's darkest chapters may continue to haunt the country for years to come. Number 4. Tragedies in the Congo. In 2001, a man and a 10-year-old child were killed when a blacksmith in Brazzaville mistook a bomb for ordinary metal and threw it into his furnace. The entire shop blew up, claiming the lives of the blacksmith and the boy who was helping him, and seriously injuring a woman who was passing by when the explosion occurred. A year earlier, 11 kids died while playing with a shell they found on their school playground with no understanding of how dangerous the object was. The Democratic Republic of Congo is Africa's second-largest country. It's known for its abundance of natural resources, including oil, gold, diamonds, and other materials. Yet nearly two-thirds of its people live in dire poverty, surviving on less than $2 a day. And these conditions, along with ethnic tensions and other dividing factors, create the perfect recipe for conflict. For decades, the country's been plagued by armed fighting, political instability, and human rights violations. 2 wars were fought in the Congo from 1996 to 2003, including a brutal war between 25 armed groups from 9 different countries. Since then, there have been many tragedies throughout the country involving the accidental detonation of unexploded bombs left behind from the conflict. Sadly, the hostilities in the Congo continue to this day. War could break out at any time as tensions remain high and occasionally erupt into turmoil. And the risks of someone unintentionally setting off a bomb remain ever present. Number 3. Guns, knives, and explosives in UK waterways. As magnet fishing becomes increasingly popular throughout the UK, people are recovering concerning amounts of guns, explosives, and knives from British waterways. And many of these weapons date back to World War II. Vice journalist Davy Brett recently joined William Nixon, who runs the YouTube channel Leeds Magneteers, and his 7- and 5-year-old sons on a magnet fishing day trip in Manchester. Nixon has received at least 2 World War II knives, 1 British and 1 German, as well as an artillery shell, a grenade, and many guns, including World War II-era machine guns. Nixon's experience isn't unique. Magnet fisher Phil Stiles told Brett that in just 3.5 years of participating in the hobby, he's recovered over 80 knives, 40 guns, and 2 hand grenades. And pulling a gun out of the water is dangerous no matter how long it's been in there, as Nixon learned after finding one and calling the police to the scene. The gun misfired as the cop deactivated it, and thankfully no one was hurt. While the UK's laws technically ban magnet fishers from removing items from canals, it's only loosely enforced. Anyone who finds a dangerous item like a gun is expected to call the police and have them handle it. Number 2. A bomb beneath Belgrade. In late 2013, a pair of construction workers in downtown Belgrade found an unexploded World War II-era bomb 20 feet below ground. That's about as deep as a giraffe is tall, where it had sat beneath the city streets for around 70 years. The 1-ton weapon was manufactured in Germany and contained over 1,360 pounds of explosives. That's about how much a cow weighs. To ensure resident safety, locals were evacuated from the area while the bomb was excavated and transported 44 miles away to a military base. That's almost as far as the Panama Canal is long, where it was slated to be safely destroyed. On March 27, 1941, the Yugoslav regime was overthrown in a coup d'etat that had British support. King Peter II was stated to be of age, even though he was just 17. The newly formed Yugoslav government, under Prime Minister and General Dusan Simovic, declined to ratify Yugoslavia's signing of the Tripartite Pact and started talks with the UK and the Soviet Union. The day after the signing of the pact, protesters assembled on the streets of Belgrade and shouted, "Better the grave than a slave, better a war than a pact." This enraged Hitler, and he issued Directive 25 as an answer to the coup and attacked Yugoslavia and Greece on April 6th. The German Air Force bombarded Belgrade for 3 days and nights. German ground troops marched in, and Yugoslavia surrendered on April 17th. The Yugoslav government and military were woefully unprepared and under-equipped, posing no match to the hundreds of aircraft laying siege to the city, resulting in heavy civilian casualties and the destruction of Belgrade's infrastructure, including the National Library of Serbia and the Belgrade Zoo. On the 6th of April 2016, the 75th anniversary of the bombing, a memorial service was held for the victims, attended by the Serbian Minister for Labor, Aleksandar Vulin. In June 2017, the government announced that the site of the crumbled foundation of the National Library of Serbia would be made into a memorial garden. Number 1. Munitions in Manipur. Late last year, Lalsangumon Gangte and his brother Lekogin were digging a pit behind their courtyard in the towns of Mura when one of them unknowingly hit a bomb with their spade, causing it to explode and kill them both. During World War II's later stages, the conflict between the Allied and the Axis powers found its way to the state of Manipur in northeastern India, along the border with Myanmar. It was here that U.S. forces came head-to-head with the Japanese as they invaded the country. When the fighting ended, the Allies buried unexploded bombs, perhaps thinking that people would be safe from them if they were kept below ground. But the consequences have been catastrophic for the region's residents ever since. Rajeshwar Yumnam, who heads the Imphal Campaign Foundation, told the Deccan Herald that there's an ongoing issue with World War II bombs in the area hurting and killing people. He said that 15 or 20 years ago, an explosion killed several kids. It wasn't covered heavily in the media, leaving one to wonder just how often things like this happen and go unreported. Nicknamed the Forgotten Front, India played a complicated and important role in the war, one that seems to be largely overlooked today. So it comes as a surprise to many that there are so many unexploded bombs littering the subcontinent, especially in the jungle. But perhaps it wouldn't be so shocking if it were customary to teach a more thorough version of history to school children.
10. The Muk Barge. Famously known as the Muk Barge, the Friendship 500 is a 187-foot, 57-meter barge that was converted into a floating McDonald's for the 1986 World Exposition on Transportation and Communication in Vancouver, British Columbia. Unlike other McDonald's restaurants, the Muk Barge kept its kitchen hidden, delivering orders to the front counter with a conveyor belt and adding a futuristic touch to the already popular fast food joint. But the restaurant's glory days were short-lived. When the expo ended, the Muk Barge closed its doors permanently. The abandoned boat failed to find a permanent home or use. The situation only worsened in 1991 when the new owner of the marina where it was docked asked the Muk Barge's owners to move it. They moved the vessel to a nearby inlet where it sat, forgotten, for the next decade. In 2010, developers Howard and Kathy Meekin bought the barge with plans to turn it into a deep-sea ocean dedicated to the history of the Pacific Ocean. But the project seems to be slow going, leading many to wonder if the couple still has any plans for the boat. Nobody has updated the Muk Barge's official Twitter account since 2017, and as of 2019, the Meekins' vision of converting it into a museum had yet to come to fruition. For now, its future remains unclear. 9. Damon Silos. During the 20th century, Chicago was home to the world's largest grain storage center. Built in 1906, the facility was known as the Damon Silos. It was owned by the Topeka and Santa Fe Railroad and consisted of a network of interlocking 15-story silos with enough room to store 400,000 bushels of grain. In 1977, a massive explosion damaged the silos beyond repair and the site closed for good. Since then, they've become an attraction for urban explorers, graffiti artists, and troublesome deviants. According to photographer Mike Kinch, who snapped eerie images of the property, the basement contains thousands of square feet of dark rooms and tunnels. Speaking with the news outlet Block Club Chicago, he explained that the tunnels run beneath half the 24-acre, 10-hectare site and that someone could easily get lost in them. It's illegal to explore this seemingly post-apocalyptic landmark, but plenty of people are curious enough to take their chances on getting caught. Those who are determined enough to explore the Damon Silos can find instructions on how to access the site if they look hard enough. 8. Haludovo Palace Hotel. The Croatian island of Krk is home to a crumbling abandoned hotel that could perhaps best be described as resembling a decaying vintage sci-fi movie set. Built in 1971, the Haludovo Palace Hotel was once a luxury destination for vacationers in what was then Yugoslavia. Certain aspects of the crumbling structure, including its monolithic qualities, resembled typical communist architecture of the time. Shortly after the hotel opened, Penthouse magazine founder Bob Guccione became an unlikely diplomat of sorts. He invested $45 million in the property and expanded it to include a penthouse casino in hopes of encouraging better relations between the US and Yugoslavia. Of course, there was something in it for him: generous laws that allowed casino owners to withdraw money from the country tax-free. The ritzy resort attracted foreign tourists of high-ranking social status, including athletes, actors, and world leaders. But these glory days came to an abrupt end when war broke out in Yugoslavia in 1990 and drove away the high-end clientele that the Haludovo Palace Hotel depended on to stay afloat. The business closed and became a shelter for refugees. It then sat abandoned for years before Croatia gained its independence. By then, it was decrepit, but several owners nevertheless attempted to revive it. The final guest stayed there in 2001. In addition to being an eyesore, the site is a safety hazard. Skylights and windows are broken, the elevators are in disrepair, and the pool is empty and missing tiles. Concrete is crumbling, metal fixtures are rusted and sharp, and chunks of broken glass are subject to fall onto someone at any given moment. Will the Haludovo Palace Hotel ever bounce back? Probably not. It's an utter disaster, and not to mention its fixtures and style are completely outdated and bizarre according to modern tastes. Most investors see the cost of fixing the place up as far more than it's worth. 7. Chicken Church. Sometime during the 1990s, a man named Daniel Alamscha dreamed about building a prayer house and took it as a sign that God wanted him to build a church. He was a devout Christian, but pictured his prayer house as a place that welcomed people of all faiths. He wanted the building to be in the shape of a dove and to sit on a hilltop near his home in central Java, Indonesia. Alamscha bought an acre of land, obtained permission to build, and got to work. His creation ended up looking more like a hen than a dove, but he went ahead and opened it to the public anyway. It soon became known as the Gereja Ayam, or the Chicken Church. Services for various religions were held on the upper floors, while the lower levels housed a drug rehabilitation center and a care facility for disabled children. At one point, the site also functioned as a mental asylum. But Alamscha wasn't paying the bills, and he eventually went broke. To make matters worse, not everyone in the community shared his humanitarian vision for the place, and they didn't hesitate to complicate things for him by publicly voicing their opposition to it. Alamscha closed and abandoned the Chicken Church in 2000. Since then, time and nature have immersed the structure into a state of decay. Ironically, however, it's become even more popular since it was deserted. Photos and stories of the church have circulated widely across the internet, drawing curious visitors from all over the world. People have even got married and had their wedding photos taken there. Visitors have helped to make the Chicken Church look a little less decrepit by covering the walls with vibrant murals and opening a cafe inside. 6. Deserted English Mansion. While driving on the outskirts of North London in 2020, urban explorer Colin Smith spotted a mysterious mansion at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. Curious to see what was inside, he returned a few days later to scope it out. When he spoke with reporters, Smith described the property as quite creepy and dark because of how big it was. He learned that the 8-bedroom mansion was built during the 1930s and that it had a servants' quarters and a bell system for communicating with staff. Inside the spooky mansion, the explorer found furniture, a grand piano, old wine bottles, a pair of eyeglasses, painted portraits, silver eating utensils, books, black and white photographs, and newspapers dating back as far as 1954. YouTube footage that Smith captured also shows dining ware, cleaning supplies, a fridge filled with moldy food, and a clock on the wall with the hands stopped at a few minutes past 6:30. It was as if an entire family had just up and left one day on a moment's notice, leaving their entire lives behind. Based on the sell-by dates on old cans of food in the kitchen, Smith determined that the house was likely abandoned around 30 years earlier. Nobody knows why the property owners deserted their lavish home and didn't take their belongings. Their seemingly sudden departure left the house looking like an eerie time capsule filled with the scattered remnants of a forgotten period in their lives. Smith told the media that he thinks the mansion may have been sold to a property tycoon who didn't have the time to renovate it and simply allowed it to fall into ruin. Would you be brave enough to enter a creepy old mansion like this? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 5. Desau Cemetery and Crematorium. In the German town of Desau, there's a road that runs through an old and mostly abandoned cemetery. Known simply as Cemetery 3, it's filled with broken and fallen tombstones and urns. While some of the statues are rather beautiful, others feature disturbing inscriptions. There are monuments dedicated to soldiers who died in both World Wars, along with a memorial to 56 workers who perished in a factory explosion in 1918. The cemetery's most perplexing feature is a domed building that resembles a chapel from the outside. Inside the deceptively quaint structure are the remnants of an old crematorium, where an estimated 100,000 bodies were burned between 1910 and the late 80s. It got so busy at one point that a new wing was added onto the building to accommodate the influx of human remains. The buildings are still filled with paperwork, old telephones, and the equipment that was used for burning human remains. Visitors have likened entering the crematorium to stepping into a horror film. 4. Hutan. Hutan is an abandoned fishing settlement located on China's Shengshan Island, roughly 40 miles, 64.4 kilometers from Shanghai. Nearly every building there is overrun with vegetation, possibly making it the greenest village on Earth. Until the early 1990s, nearly 2,000 fishermen and their families inhabited Hutan, but the small fishing community lacked the ability to meet the industry's growing demand, and residents fled to the mainland and elsewhere for other professions and presumably a better life. Today, only a handful of residents remain, with nearly all of Hutan's homes sitting empty and abandoned. After people left, nature took back over, hence the settlement's reputation for being green. Inside the homes, visitors can catch a glimpse of life exactly as the residents left it, with even the furniture remaining in place for decades and counting. Ironically, Hutan has become a tourist destination due precisely to its abandoned nature, leaving a bittersweet mark on the area for those who once considered it their home, and the few who still do. At the very least, tourism dollars are welcomed in the dwindling community. 3. Gusinville-Vaupés. The Parisian suburb of Gusinville-Vaupés was once considered an attractive place to live. It was home to 144 families. It retained a quaint, old-town charm, but was close to the city. There were shops, cafes, a church, and even a weekend farmers market that drew customers from outside the village. Things started going downhill in 1973, when a prototype for a Soviet supersonic jet crashed into the town during the Paris Air Show. The accident destroyed 15 houses and a school, and killed 8 residents, as well as the plane's crew. A year later, Charles de Gaulle International Airport opened nearby. The airport's so close to Gusinville, the neighborhood is considered part of the runway approach. Low-flying planes passed over the town day and night, causing unbearable noise and rattling the historic brick homes. Almost all of Gusinville's residents moved within a year after the airport opened. Some people were so eager to get away, they didn't even bother to sell their homes first. The airport bought 100 of the vacant houses in exchange for agreeing to take care of them, but the contract was never enforced. There are a few residents left, but the village consists mostly of abandoned squares, overgrown yards, and decrepit, boarded-up graffiti-covered homes with broken windows. Some houses have been demolished, but many still stand despite their sad state. Because the village church is a protected property, nothing near it can be destroyed, sparing a good portion of the town from the wrecking ball. The church is one of Gusinville's only fixtures that's remained in good condition. As a historic monument, it's taken care of while everything around it rots. The commotion that once filled the town has been replaced with a chilling silence, punctuated by the deafening sound of commercial jets passing overhead. Some of the last holdouts who refused to leave Gusinville tried to revive it in recent years. The population has increased slightly, but the homes need millions of dollars worth of renovations. 2. Film City. In the Qatari desert, several hours outside the capital city of Doha, there's a deserted, ancient-looking Bedouin-style village known as Film City. The reason behind its existence is somewhat of a mystery, but it's widely believed that the site is an abandoned film set that was built for a movie or television series. Visitors are allowed to explore the property, which contains Islamic-styled towers called minarets, a mosque, and mud brick houses with wooden doors. Writing for Afar, Adriana Paramo explained that Film City was formerly a fishing village and that it was abandoned during the 1970s. Then in 2009, it was partially rebuilt for film purposes, according to some, although the story varies and nobody seems to truly know what to believe. The fact that there's an abandoned village smack dab in the middle of the vast desert is creepy enough, but the lack of cars and humans, aside from other visitors and a security guard, only adds to the eeriness. And a four-wheel drive is required just to get there, serving as a reminder of just how remote the location is. 1. Dacha Kavitko, situated on a cliff overlooking the Black Sea in the Russian city of Sochi, is a mysterious derelict mansion without a roof. It was built during the early 20th century by a wealthy Russian colonel named Andrei Valerianovich Kavitko and was meant to resemble an Italian mansion that his wife's wealthy family owned. The family only enjoyed the newly built home for about a year before the Russian Revolution started in 1917. Kavitko knew he was in trouble due to his Tsarist loyalties. He and his wife fled to Italy, and the state took possession of the mansion. It was converted to a home for troubled teens, and then became a vacation home. The building functioned as a hospital during World War II, then became a sanatorium. Renovation work began during the late 80s, but was left unfinished when the Soviet Union collapsed and ran out of money to fund these types of projects. The house has sat abandoned ever since, falling further and further into disrepair. There's been talk in recent years about fixing it up, but it hasn't happened yet. It's in really poor condition, and it would be very expensive to save from completely falling apart. The mansion is so damaged that explorers are urged to be extremely cautious and not to try going upstairs. Thanks for watching. Which one of these strange abandoned places would you like to see? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.